An Empire of Ice and Fire by Longclaw 1-6. Chapter 100. The Duel of the Fates. The roar of the hand cannons boomed all over but the gale, each man blasting away into the swarm. Wounded reloading for the men in the front, each of Sir Mackenzie's stalwarts firing up to 5 different weapons to keep a steady rate of fire. Smoke from the black powder mixing with the snow to obscure the landscape even as close as 10 feet away. "Fuck, I can't see anything!" Tyrion Lannister stood on tiptoes, silently cursing Rickon Stark for allowing the battlements to be so high.
"Yeah, I'd rather not see this,"
one of the archers breathed, grabbing another arrow. Their stocks only 2/3 of what they had started out with. The builders had been hard at work after Last Hearth, expanding the earthworks in front of Winterfell. Instead of a single row of staves, they had constructed 2, the second behind the first elevated snowdrift. Hundreds of wights met their deaths as they scrambled atop the first earthwork, only to fall upon the dragonglass tipped staves. It rolled up the great swarm, but the thousands and thousands more behind only pushed forth like a great wave, rushing straight for the infantry.
"Men, knock!"
Thousands of bowmen knocked their arrows. Tyrion, short sword out and waving, made both a ridiculous and an inspiring sight to see.
"Loose! Loose at will!"
A collective whoosh echoed as each bowstring sprung, arrows sallying forth in a collective mass. Those on the battlements themselves aimed directly for the enemy, while those in the courtyard sallied above the walls to plunge down. Arrows smashed through skulls, punctured rib cages, hundreds falling into the void as their blue eyes flashed out in a malevolent twinkle that rippled across the battlefield. Tips alight, turning many a wight into a running torch, jaws open in anguished screams as they flailed about.
"Keep the fire! Keep the fire!"
Now was not the time for volleys, just a steady stream of death upon the attackers. Great beasts and massive giants drew the greatest fire, dozens of arrows smacking into their skin and hide. Walkers vectored wights behind the meat shields that crashed into the awaiting spears. Saber-tooth upon him, Grey Worm was forced back several paces, snow piling around his ankles.
"Oh my God, Sir Gagon!"
He heaved against his shield, the thin strip of metal and wood separating him from the snapping jaws of the beast. A snarl left him, thrusting up with his dragonglass spear. The tip sliced through flesh and bone alike, snaps weakening.
"Oregon Seeger on!"
Tightly packed, the unsullied lock shields, Podrick Payne's northern hoplites on their right and Baelor Hightower's reach pikemen on the left. Swords of battered northerners and fresh auxiliaries began to patch up any hole. Tumbling over the double earthworks, having clawed through their own impaled and blown apart comrades to get there. Trebuchets hurling boulders through the air, and cannon crews depressing their barrels, firing over open sights to vaporize the dead. Numerous survivors crashing against shield walls. Large great swords and the massive 2-handed broadswords of the auxiliaries cutting swaths through the dead like scythes. Spears stabbing into the mass of dead from the ever-present grunt of the hoplites. The dead Saber-tooth collapsed to the ground, Grey Worm withdrawing his spear only to hear a powerful bellow. Immense feet kicking through the snowdrifts and earthworks, the 2 undead giants crushed wights underneath them as they made a pathway for the other corpses to swarm through.
"Varb Zemizargal!"
Grey Worm barked, doing his best not to cringe in horror as each giant yanked one of his men out of formation, ripping them apart with their bare hands. He snarled, spear leaving the tight nest of shields to stab through the eyes of the wight. Other Unsullied around him presented a flurry of spear points as the great monsters. Booming behind him, another bellow caught Grey Worm's attention as one Weg One Dar One surged forth, broadsword forged by the great foundries of King's Landing, coated in dragonglass. He swung it wide at one of the giants, his former brothers. The blade cut deep, literally disemboweling it, rotting insides spilling upon the Unsullied as the giant collapsed. Grateful for the cold gale masking the smell, Grey Worm yanked back his hand and hurled the spear at the head of the other giant, running right through its eye. He leapt up upon the giant, removing his spear. "Zombideros!" Charging into a gap, ice scything across a line of wights. Robb Stark single-handedly patching up a gap in the line from where a dozen had been fallen. Young Wolf screaming into the night as the men of House Mormont raced to reinforce him. "Hold!" A spear pierced Robb just below his left shoulder. He snarled, decapitating the wight, yanking out the spear and hurling it at the onrushing Shadowcat, eyes twirling as the Lord of Winterfell refused to wield. "For fuck's sake, hold!" Sword running through another, Tommen Lannister drew it back, slashing across another wight's shoulders as it tried to scramble atop the earthworks. "I got two!" he yelled, confidence surging through him. "Duck!" Not having noticed the massive wight, easily 2 heads taller than him, the young Lord of Casterly Rock nevertheless obeyed blindly. Falling to his knees as Oathkeeper swung, loud battle cry from Brienne heralding the crash through the ribcage. Eyes extinguishing as the corpse toppled into the mass below. "Don't get overconfident, boy!" Side by side, the 2 of them stabbed forward. The Westerlands host was atop the second rise in the earthworks, shields dug into the ground and spears pointed downwards, skewering any wight that dared try to climb up. Swordsmen darted to fill gaps as many in the shield wall were yanked down by their spears, screams turning into gurgles as they disappeared into the swarm. Cannon and rockets firing at point-blank range, flesh evaporating, bodies blown apart, but still more came, braving the intense fire of the arrows and hand cannons. Widow's wail punched through the mouth of a Shadowcat. Jaime let the beast fall away, twirling the blade as Arthur Dayne had taught him long so to do, before slicing it across another. He was in his element, feeling like the great Kingsguard he had been, worthy successor to Sir Barristan or Sir Gerald. "Hear us, raw men!" he shouted, urging his men to stay firm. The pride of the Westerlands holding the eastern flank. A screaming wildling charged over the piles of bodies, bronze axe glinting in the firelight. Jaime batted the weapon aside. Dragonglass daggers fitted onto his metal arm surged forth. They easily speared through the skull of the wight, rotting flesh easily giving way as he yanked back. Skull still embedded on his arm, Jaime threw it off, hitting a skeleton in the breastbone and sending him flying back into the void. Below, the trench was filled with bodies, some still but most writhing, bursting forth with bony hands and sharp daggers, hacking at and dragging men into the shield wall to their death. "Bloody hell!" Brienne snarled, her and Tommen stabbing downward, desperate to turn the carpet of corpses into a mass grave rather than a deadly quicksand. It wasn't enough. "We need to fall back!" she yelled at Jaime. "We'll be overwhelmed!" Smashing the nose of a wight with Widow's Wail's hilt, Jaime agreed. "Fall back, man! 5 paces!" The line of Westermen shuddered, easing back with steady, scrambling steps, spears and swords pointing up as dozens of wights charged off the snow-capped earthworks, trying to leap atop the men-at-arms. Jaime thrust Widow's Wail into the air, skewering one as they both crashed into the ground. It writhed atop him for a moment before all the eyes died. Pushing it off, Jaime saw a massive axe coming down on him, rolling out of the way just in time as the axe crashed into the ground, missing him by inches. The wight screeched just before going limp suddenly. Crumbling to the snow, Brienne yanked back her sword. "Get up, Queen Shield!" She clasped his remaining hand, pulling him up to her feet. "Not letting you leave me after that kiss!" Heat suddenly searing him as the purple dragon shot by, incinerating countless of wights from the air. Jaime offered a grin. "Reform! Kill fucking all of them!" Line break. "How the fuck will we get through that?" Arya was hopeful. No, she really was. But faced with a horde of tens of thousands between her and the eastern defences, it was kind of hard to stay optimistic. Beric wiped his one eye, clutching his flaming sword, smiling at the roar from the heavens. "The Lord of Light will provide," he breathed, just as Rhaella shot past. "With me!" The dragon lanced flame out onto the ground, blasting a long line directly through the army of the dead. Sensing the blood of her father in danger, protecting her pack with every flame in her body, wight after wight turned to smoke and ash, the cluster of fighters racing at top speed through the scorched corridor in the ranks of the dead. Hurtling to the ground, eventually the wights rose, recovering what wits they had, their blackened forms screeching, and charged after the living. An arrow already in her bow, Mira let it fly, followed quickly by 2 more in succession, toppling white after white in front of them. Gendry and Beric swung their weapons, collapsing 6 in their single swings. Riella winging away, Leonaris dove, disgorging her dragonfire to maintain the long strip, protecting her father's blood. The aforementioned blood fired her dwarf cannon, toppling a white with a headshot. She leapt upon one in the middle of the path, cat's paw slicing through flesh. Mira downing one about to attack her, arrow through the eye. Ahead, the walls grew closer and closer. "Pour it in!" yelled Rickon, notching an arrow in his own bow. It flew, slamming between the eyes of an ice spider. Crossbow, bow, cannon, and hand cannon emptied into the swarm, felling thousands, but thousands more charging, forming giant piles for others to clamber up. Dornish reserves hacking away to protect them. Cursing, Rickon kept loosing, having lost count how many he had taken down since the battle began. Tyene Martell, Sir Bronn, and Edric Dane fought together, rallying the Dornish forces atop the walls. Reinforcements scrambled up the rickety ladders as the Whites began leaping over the battlements to assault them. A crossbow felled the first. Edric's dual sword sliced the head off the second, one coating in dragonglass, while the other was the Valyrian steel of the infamous Dawn. Bronn darted forward, hacking the sword arm off of one before kicking it over the battlements. With the hissing battlecry of Sunspear, Tyene charged, daggers bearing into one and sending them to the ground. She flipped, flexible legs crunching the chin of a giant white and grabbing its spear, twirling it like her father, taking down a further 3 before burying it in the large one, yanking her daggers out of the first corpse just as her husband yanked her back, more Whites erupting over the breach. Whites charging onto the battlements, Rickon drew his own sword, meeting the rusty blade of a long-dead Night's Watchman. Metal clanging as he was forced to the ground, sword falling from his hand. Rapidly reaching for his belt, Rickon drew the dwarf cannon just as the White leapt on him, jaw open to rip through his skin with bare teeth. The firearm roared barrel right in the monster's mouth, blowing out the back of its brains. Rickon forced the corpse off him, catching the glimpse of a flaming sword to his right, just as someone familiar hovered over him. Rickon blinked. "Arya?" "The one and only." She held him up. "Come on, they're almost fucking on us." Blasts of flame enveloped the Whites, immolating hundreds, Leonaris screeching in triumph, banking away over the walls to cheers from the living defenders. Below, a walker's steely blue glaze glowered in rage at the immense beast. A flicker to the right, spotting another dark shape turning for its own attack run. "Get in position! Take it down!" The bitter cold slammed into Riella, snow and ice coating her, chilling her heated skin to the bone. Eyes stinging, she fought her instincts to keep them open, avoiding the tiny flickers of torchlight in favour of the blackness to the north. A blackness twinkling with blue in the pyres of her sister's previous attack. Closer and closer the ground grew, Riella plunging with great speed. "Hold! Hold! Hold! Now!" More hissing with heat and flame, wings extended to slow her from the rapid dive into a slow glide, the dragonfire emerging in a great roar to incinerate anything below. Rotting flesh igniting like dried paper, Riella unleashed everything she had upon White and beast alike. All tracked by a walker. "Go!" Juvenile dragon still blazing past, he raised his arm, spear in hand. Doubling her fury, unloading its deadly inferno upon the evil monsters bent on wiping out her father's home, Riella's eyes still picked up the milky glint of her flames on a silver shooting at her. She extinguished the fire, hooting in distress as her wings beat, slowing her, ice spear missing by 10 feet front. The walker smirked. With a bellowing screech, a large bear, face matted with dried blood and lower half a mix of shredded flesh and blackened bone, leapt from the swarm, an ice spider on its back, teeth and claw bared as it aimed straight for the hovering dragon. It hit Riella with a thud, the purple dragon wailing in alarm, turning quickly into a screech of pain. Bear sinking its fangs into her scales. Moving to flap her wings, Riella shrieked yet again as another bear spider attacker leapt onto her, combined White nearly collapsing her to the ground before she managed to right herself, ascending into the clouds. Jinking and weaving, the bears were stubborn, claws firmly embedded in her flesh, teeth biting and slicing through Riella. Mandibles clashing together in a malevolent gurgle, the spiders scurried from their carriers onto her back, gunning for her neck. She wailed, almost vital spot under siege. Ice slammed into her face. Riella wiped her head around, blocking out the pain and snapping her powerful jaws at the spiders. One darted back, but the other screamed as Riella's teeth sunk through its carapace. She jerked her neck around, tossing the spider into the swirling void. Such small victory proved just that. Riella howled into the winter's gale. Shaken, and dead flesh unaffected, the large fangs ripped through scales. Paws gouged out a large gap in Riella's hide. Spider ripping out a spine from her neck and digging into the wound with its mandibles. Her wing beats began to falter, cold and shock beginning to plunge her to earth as one readied to rip her wings to shreds. Searing dragonfire sent a live wire through Riella, the beloved heat scorching her back. Spider immolated upon contact, Leonera shot past her sister, looping furiously, nearly blacking out from the intense forces subjected to her. Powerful ears picked up the piercing shrieks of the bear, completely aflame. Rage filling her, Leonera shot another tongue of flame. Riella unaffected as the bear turned to ash. The other, roaring, leapt at Leoneris as she passed by, only for the dragon to grab it by her talons. She roared herself, sinking her flesh into its shoulder and ripping it apart, letting the dismembered carcass plummet back to earth. Sensing her sister in distress, she pushed the struggling Riella towards the snow-capped hills south of Winterfell. Guiding her sister in, nudging her form from below, Leoneris hooted in worry as Riella crashed into a snowdrift. The dragon circling around, landing next to her purple-scaled skin. The injured dragon had skidded hard into the snow, wings flapping like mad and the biting cold stabbing her into her open wounds, evaporating into mist from her superheated blood that stained the ground. Stenching the bleeding, but painful like all seven hells. Riella moaned and hissed, filling the air with her cries of anguish as Leonera scooted to her side, wrapping a wing around her and nudging her sister gently, comfortingly, cooing encouragement and hope. Not that the purple dragon felt it at the moment. Suddenly, a searing warmth overpowered each of them, a flash of light billowing in the distance to the north of the Wolfswood. Their brothers roared in triumph. They felt the connection too, joy surging through both dragons as they added their screeches to the mix. "Mother is back!" Line break. The winds howled around them, vortex collapsing as the swirling snow enveloped the three figures. The Night King stared at the last dragons in absolute shock.
How could this?
For once, he was speechless, as Jon and Daenerys Targaryen began circling him, smoky Valyrian steel hungry for his icy flesh.
Impossible!
Primal rage welling inside of her, Daenerys leveled Saracen directly at him. "Ledrizes is cassis daor bazdari," her words were a hiss. "You knew that when you had me turned. I fought against your magic, and all I needed was my family to break free." She was going to enjoy hacking him to bits.
Family.
His expression calmed in recognition.
The three-eyed raven. I should have known.
A slight chuckle.
Caused me the most trouble outside of Soren.
Marden shifted his gaze at Jon.
And both were bigger than either of you. Both far greater than either of you.
Letting the flames of his blade warm him, banish away the unearthly chill, Jon never felt a greater hate, never felt a greater hope. His greatest foe and his greatest love both before him.
My father taught me big men fall just as quickly as little ones if you put a sword through their hearts.
He nodded at Daenerys, readying.
Time to put that to the test.
Skor mi delitami tambores temis, erenisis ilamorgoholis, the Empress answered. His gaze hardened, eyes narrowing, blue glow darkening into a hue of the deepest of oceans.
And so it is.
The Night King extended his blade. snow drawn into the hilt as a new blade formed, sword transforming before their eyes into a dual-bladed staff.
Isgahil Mogohon!
Daenerys drew Saracen back, holding the iced steel above her, parallel to the ground. Drawing on every lesson Jorah, Barristan and Jon had taught her. Held back, ready to bring the fury. Skahas Mahat Vestiri! Nadahus! Her eyes blazed dragonfire. Jon trod Longclaw, sparks sprinkling in the snow around him, as it settled close to his chest. Replaying every fight since training with Robb and Theon in the Winterfell courtyard. Patiently waiting to attack, to deliver the king's justice.
Dumba Dahor! Nodaria!
His gaze roared a winter's gale. Cold anger searching, the Night King twirled the newly formed glaive, leaping into the air with an inhuman strength and agility. Jon dashed forward, slashing up with Longclaw. Sparks flying, the Night King landed in the snow with a plop as he battered aside the Emperor's sword. Barely upon the ground for a moment before he jerked the glaive upwards, Dany aimed a slash for his upper back, only for a skillful parry. None in the fight held anything back. Lunges and thrusts vigorous with the force of a roaring giant. The Night King was outnumbered, but he easily made up for it with his superhuman strength. Driving the last dragons to near exhaustion with his assault and leaping around the trees once things got dodgy. Punches and kicks were thrown in wild abandon. Dany bashing Marden in the face with Saracen's hilt, only just after dodging Longclaw. The curved blade spun around to slice a scar in the Night King's cheek. Ruler of Winter snarling as he slammed the heel of his hand into Dany's jaw, sending her reeling. Da! Screaming at the top of his lungs, Jon charged, bringing Longclaw down with 2 furious chops. But the Night King was faster. Twirling around him, Jon had only just turned when the front kick sent him crashing into a tree. Back aching, hot blood trickling down his forehead, Jon's fuzzy gaze cleared enough to see the punch shooting for his head. He jerked to the side, icy blue fist gutting a chunk out of the pine tree. Snarling, the Night King swung his glaive with a furious lunge. Jon spinning himself around the trunk just in time, the blade slicing the immense pine in half. Tripping on a root and falling onto his face, Longclaw extinguishing against the snow. He could barely catch his breath before the trunk gave way. Blade crashing through this entire trunk began to topple on him. Jon rolled until he was back staring at the sky, trees crashing beside him. No! For the second time that night, Dany haunted an attack meant for him. Dexterous slashes driving their enemy back and slicing at the glaive. Tip chopped off. The Night King cartwheeled in the air just ahead of another slash from Daenerys, walking back as a gust of snowy air reformed his blades, Dany swirling Saracen as she advanced. Staring at his former queen, narrowed violet eyes filling him with rage. Marden furiously spun the glaive in the air, snarl on his face as Saracen clashed against it. Curved steel whisking off to the left by a powerful flick of the wrist. Empress's reflex catching the resulting slash within a split second. Behind, Jon leapt to his feet, Longclaw igniting as he advanced back into the fight, flames dancing violently in the resulting charge. Upper blade forced off Saracen while the lower parried an uppercut from the Longclaw. The Night King tireless while the dragons were propelled by rage and an icy grit. Staff thrusting forward to block the attack by Dany. Jon twirled around, hair whipping in the wind as he brought Longclaw at the Night King's unprotected back, screaming in pure winter's fury. Senses strong and movements agile, Marden jerked back the blade upward, catching Jon's strike but shattering the glaive. Sparks and flecks of ice showering all 3 of them. Jon recovered, wrists twirling Longclaw back into position, while Dany turned herself, ready to slash, to force their opening. With a harsh kick, the Night King sent Dany to the ground, the Empress grunting as she fell upon the snow. Ice clanging against the fiery steel. Marden's gaze burned into a freezing blue. Jon's strike meeting the Night King's greater force. Speed bringing down blow after blow. Tables turning, forcing the Emperor to dart back and regroup. The storm reforming Marden's double-bladed glaive for a second time, retreating deeper into the forest. Legs pumping, blades held diagonal to the ground as they ran, Daenerys managed to catch a flash of clear blue, ducking as the glaive sliced above her, a single strand of hair severed by the sharp edge honed by the dark magic of the old gods. She spun around, joining with Jon, whose thrusts drove the Night King back several paces, all glaring into each other's eyes. Marden calm and seething, while Jon blazed and Dany fumed. Wailing gusts of snow and ice the only sound as the fight stilled. Each side assessing their opponents. Breaking the momentary truce, Dany feinted forward, drawing the Night King's attention but for a moment, allowing Jon to surge forth, both hands gripping Longclaw. The Night King spun. The Night King parried. The Night King used his agility and dexterity to block Jon's forceful slashes, letting him come, baiting him further and further till a well-timed spin led the charging Emperor to overstep, exposing his rear. On the onrushing Daenerys thwarting that line of attack, glaive twisting to clang against Saracen. Dany twisted, catching him off guard as Jon returned, working in tandem to test every opening, probe every weakness, if not to overpower, then to overload. Gradually, his parries grew harried, filled with bare misses, the relentless ferocity of the last dragons forcing him to lunge with the tenacity of a cornered rat, buying him precious seconds to regroup. Gaze searching, he knew there was no point in this. It was time to bring his fury on Winterfell itself. "Valtharax, come!" Letting the storm howl his battle cry, Marden twirled his glaive, advancing on Jon. The blades clashed against each other, Jon's arms straining to fend off the dual attacks. Right, left, right, left. The Night King was relentless, sparks hissing in the air, as he so took his hate savagely against the sword half forged from his brothers. Jon ducked, glaive slicing through the trunk of a great tree as if it was butter, the clang of ice against Longclaw mixing with the splintered groan of the thick pine toppling over. Watching Dany charge through the swirling snow, Jon heaved forward, forcing Marden back. He thrust, spinning his shoulders to remain upright as the flaming tip just grazed the Night King's cuirass. Marden recovered quickly, stabbing downward at Jon's legs, the Emperor twisting to catch the attack. Dany, lips pursed in anger, slashed up. The Night King caught it, jerking the glaive around and knocking it back behind him. A rear kick was noticed by her, Dany leaping back to avoid it. Jon lunged, feinting to the right. An instant he spun Longclaw around and slashed left, a move that was blocked, but not by the upward thrust of the knee, smashing into the Night King's stomach, staggering him back into the snow. Picking up the loud growling above, the Night King leapt into the air just as Dany swung at him, hand latching onto the neck spine of Valtharax, inky black dragons screaming in upside down over their heads. "Fuck!" Jon grunted, watching their quarry disappear into the blackness of the void. Daenerys sucked in a breath, freezing air stabbing at her lungs, grounding her amongst the living. "Time for the skies, Jon!" Sheathing Saracen, ice falling off the steel, she closed her eyes and called to her dragon, "Balerion, come!" "Rhaegal, come!" Sensing the powerful connection, feeling their mounts racing towards them, Jon looked at his wife. Flushed crimson, breath misting in the cold air, chest heaving with haggard breaths. Full of life, full of fire. His Dany. Without a word, he quickly wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her to him and slamming their lips together. Shocked for a moment, Dany melted into the kiss, tongue meeting his as warmth returned to her world. One nightmare over, reunited finally with her beloved. The kiss broke after what had to be a few seconds, but it seemed longer to the young couple. "I love you," she breathed, brimming with emotion. "I love you." His reply no different, reaching up to cup her cheek, stroking her skin with his palm. Sighing happily, Dany nuzzled the scarred, soft hand, glad to have at least one moment with him before being plunged into the fight once more. The moment ended as swiftly as it began. Both dragons plopping onto the ground with a boom. Trees snapping, Balerion and Rhaegal dropped their shoulders without a word. Dany gave Jon's hand one last squeeze before they raced to their mounts, climbing without any undue delay. Balerion hooted with ecstatic joy, body flushing with a soothing heat as he felt his mother's comforting warmth once more. Danny resisted the urge to simply embrace her dragon. Time of the essence. She settled for gently stroking his scales. I'm back, my darling. Ready? Another hoot, this one dripping with a zealous determination. Turning her head to look at Rhaegal, her eyes found Jon's. Together? The winds howled around them, but Jon could hear his beloved clear as day.
Together.
A small smile quickly returned.
Sovegon!
Sovegon! Twin roars fought against the storm as the dragons took to the skies. End of chapter. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed that. Oh boy, okay, 3-way duel, yes! And that lovely little moment. Oh, yes, just yes. Anyway, you guys know the drill. Like, comment and subscribe and hit that bell to get notified if I never upload a new video. Have a good day, night or whatever time zone you're in. Take care my guys, gals and non-binary pals. I'll see you in another video. Bye!